Hello, hello, hello. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. Welcome back to my channel, my Loverlies. If you've never been here before, thank you so much for clicking on my video. I am so happy you found me. I do so hope that you will like and subscribe before you leave. Become part of the Mama family. Mama's got your back, at least where makeup's concerned, and definitely when that makeup is cheap. Today is True Love Tuesday. We are talking about something just a little bit different this week. I feel like we were getting into a little bit of a rut. Everything was kind of sounding same old, same old. So I took a different avenue this week. We are talking about the Countess of Castiglione. She is infamous and singular and just kind of spectacular. This week's video is all about self-love and all of the good and bad things that come along with it. Before we get started, a very special, very warm welcome to any of those that are new to my channel. If you are here and you're new, thank you so much for clicking on my video. I am so incredibly happy to have you. If you're returning and you've been here before, baby, welcome back. Thank you so much for stopping by. Guys, if you enjoy the content, I do so hope that you will mash that thumbs up button. I hope that you will subscribe if you have not already. And I hope that you will ring my bell, turn on your notifications, so that way, next time I upload a video, you can come right back here and we can hang out together again. Also, I have my eye makeup done already. Y'all, this eye look is just absolutely everything. It is so simple and so soft. I was trying to go for something just a little bit ethereal, and I believe that I managed it. I believe I achieved the vision. It is so, so pretty. I did, of course, make sure to film a TikTok on today's eye look if you are interested. I'll have the tag for that as well as all of my other socials, Facebook, Instagram, all that good stuff, linked in the description box below, along with a list of everything that I'm going to use in today's video. I don't usually talk too awful much about the products that I use while I'm doing these videos, but of course, if you have any questions about what I used or how I used it, all you have to do is leave me a comment and I will get back to you. Alright, babes, all that good stuff out of the way, let's go ahead and dive in to this story. Y'all, now love stories, they come in all different shapes and sizes. There are about 1,000,001 different circumstances that go into a really good love story, right? They can be just this long, drawn-out, epic affair. They can be short and tragic. They can have, 2 people, 4 people, 20 people. In this case, 1 person. Today's story is about a journey of self-love that is unparalleled throughout history. This woman was truly a wonder of the world. She was an original. She was a pioneer. Absolutely insane. When I learned about her, I was like, oh yeah. I was like, we are doing this. We, of course, are speaking about the Countess of Castiglione. I hope that I am saying that name correctly. There are a lot of unpronounceable names in today's video, so if I get them wrong, please give me just a little bit of grace. I truly am trying. But if you guys see me looking over in this direction, it is because I am looking at my notes. There aren't too awful many of them for today's video. I'm thinking we're going to be here for a good 30 minutes though. So sit back, relax, get you a big old cup of something to drink, maybe even a snack, and let's go ahead and dive in. So I want to start today's video off with a quote. And this quote is kind of going to set up the tone for the rest of the story, because this is just how this woman feels about herself. She says, I equal the highest born ladies with my birth. I surpass them with my beauty, and I judge them with my mind. This woman literally thought that her stuff did not stink. And baby, she wasn't wrong. She wasn't wrong. She was very fairly dubbed one of the world's most beautiful women at that time. She was just incredibly beautiful. Unfortunately, she very much so let that get to her head, and she let it get to her head in a very, very big way. Now, it would be different if it got to her head and like maybe it wasn't like true, or maybe she was just kind of full of herself for no reason. But not only was she incredibly beautiful, and not only was she incredibly pompous, and not only was she did she not think that her stuff didn't stink, right? but she was freaking fantastic. Like, she accomplished, she was a spy. She was, oh, there's so much about this woman that I just cannot wait to share with you. So, Virginia Aldani, I think that is how you pronounce her last name. Again, I could be very, very wrong about that. Countess of Castiglione. She was convinced she was the most beautiful woman born since God had created the earth. With this belief and a whole lot of attitude, she managed to lead not one, but several lives. Y'all, she did a little bit of everything. She was a conspirator. She was a diplomat in petticoats. Like, she was an emancipated courtesan. Like, she was a mistress. She was a madam. She was absolutely anything that she wanted to be. She invented the frickin' selfie. Like, she was a pioneer of photography as well. Her story is, it's kind of mind-blowing. But above all, she was a professional beauty. Her beauty was, besides one other thing, her beauty was the most important thing to her in her entire life. It is what she built her entire life around. It is what she built her entire personality around. And, I thought today's video, like, kind of this topic, was a little bit apropos, especially given the sphere of the internet that I am in. I sit here and I stare at myself in a mirror all day, every day. I sit here and do nothing but, like, put makeup on and beautify myself all day, every day. And it makes you look at yourself just a little bit differently. And what I mean when I say that is that I have had to come to terms with a lot of my flaws, especially when I sit here and I stare at myself in the mirror for so much during the span of a day. It is very, very easy to pick out every single fault. It is very easy to kind of amplify every single thing wrong with your appearance that you can. Now, I am thankfully not a super vain person. I know sitting here doing my makeup kind of says something a little bit different, but I've always been a bigger woman. I've had to come to terms with the fact that I, for the most part, for the societal norm, am not a beautiful woman. Does that mean that I don't think that I'm beautiful or that I don't feel that I'm beautiful? Certainly not. I think my poop don't stink either. But what I'm saying is, I've had to come to terms with the fact that most people look at me and they don't see a beautiful woman. Most people look at me and they just kind of see something they would really rather not associate with. So I'm kind of coming from the opposite side of the spectrum for what she is, because she was born very standardly beautiful. Like, she was just, everybody thought she was absolutely stunning. But the dilemma that she faces in her story is thankfully something that hopefully I won't have to face. And if I do have to face it, it won't be so awful, because I never had that high opinion of my beauty in the first place, because I kind of grew up knowing that my beauty wasn't the first and foremost, most special, important thing about myself. I never really put too much stock in it. And I think her story kind of highlights what can happen when you put too much stock and too much of your self-worth into your appearance. But the Countess was born for Virginia Aldini Rapellini on March 22nd, 1837. So long time ago. She was born in Florence, Tuscany. And she was born to two parents who were both of her parents were beautiful as well, but they were also part of the minor nobility. So she was born into a position of wealth and power, and she was kind of like, she was kind of set up to be spoiled from the very, very beginning. Now, unfortunately, I think a lot of her backstory has to do with the fact it has to do with why she kind of grew to be the kind of woman that she was. So she was born to her father, the Marquis. He was Filippo Aldini Rapellini, and then her mother, Isabella, both members of the minor Tuscan nobility. She was born basically as a bargaining chip. Now, as we know, for the most part, when men had daughters back in the day, it was basically so that they could marry them off for wealth, land, power, money, what have you. men didn't appreciate their daughters. They didn't want their daughters. Their daughters were nothing but tools to use in the advancement of themselves, right? So she was born, and she was born female, and her father promptly ignored her. Her father really didn't want anything to do with her, and I think she desperately was hoping and seeking her father's attention and validation. And I think part of this is why she grew up and really put so much stock into male validation. I think she wanted her father's approval and her father's love so badly that she was willing to build an entire persona around being worthy of her father's love. So she was, of course, a child bride. Now, if there's anything we know about men back in, in the way back when, is that there were two things that they valued above all else: power and possessions. And Virginia was a possession, and she was a very, very valuable possession. Not only was she of noble birth, not only did she come with wealth, like she came with a fantastic dowry, she came with connections, but she was also incredibly beautiful, and that bumped up her worth, especially on the marriage mart, exponentially. So the quicker that her father could get her married off, the more money that he could make, right? Because the younger the bride, the more potential for children, the more expensive, the more valuable she was, right? So, of course, she was a child bride. Her father, after ignoring her for the first 17 years of her life, decided that he was going to marry her off. He was going to make her a child bride and marry her off to some old guy at the age of 17. So that's exactly what he does. Now, of course, the marriage is very advantageous for her father. Her father gets quite a bit out of the marriage, and Virginia is just kind of like left to pay the piper, right? So she gets married to this guy. She is wed to Francesco Veresis, the Count of Castiglione, right? He was 12 years her senior, which I guess if she's 17 and he's only 12 years older than her, I assume that it could have been much, much worse. What's 12 years older than 17? So 17, 27, 29, so almost 30 years old. Even at 30 years old, at 7, he's obviously a lot older than her. But, I mean, he wasn't awful. It wasn't like she was married off to some awful, vile old guy, right? So she's married to this 30-year-old man, and of course she is ripped from her life and everything that she's ever known, and she is kind of foisted off onto this man, and she is kind of left trying to pick up the pieces, trying to rebuild her life. Her father, of course, doesn't really have anything else to do with her. Her father's got what he was going to get out of his relationship with her, so he's done with her. Doesn't really have a good relationship with her mother either. So she's kind of left to fend for herself and really trying to figure out her new role as Countess and being kind of shoved into this at such a young and tender age. Now, she gets married. Of course, her husband is incredibly happy with the union. She's young, she's beautiful, and, of course, they go home and they get down to business. And 1 year after they were wed, Virginia gives birth to her one and only child. She gives birth to a boy, a little boy named Giorgio. She gives birth to a little boy named Giorgio, and this boy is the absolute light of her life. Now, you can say a lot of things about this woman, and in fact, I will be saying a lot of things about this woman, through the coming video. But I will say, she was a devoted mother. She loved her child. There was nothing that she would not do for her child. And I think her child was really, her son was her driving force. I think her son is what really kept her going through a lot of this. So she gets married. She's kind of like doing her thing. She has her child. She's settling in to married life, settling in to being the new Countess. And, life is going as good as it possibly can at this point in time. Now, in Europe at this time, big things are happening. Revolutions are underway. The people want something different. They're like the status quo is changing. And this doesn't bypass Virginia. She actually has quite a big role to play in actually making the revolution happen. So an effort is being made to establish a united and independent kingdom of Italy. Now, Virginia's cousin, Camillo Bensa, Count of Cavour, he served as a minister to King Vittorio Emanuele II of Sardinia. Lots of very, very big names, but to kind of dumb it down a little bit, her cousin was kind of like an advisor to the King of Sardinia, right? And of course, she corresponds with her cousin. Her cousin knows who she is. They have a relationship, and things are happening, right? And Emmanuel, what's his name? Her cousin's name? Camillo. Camillo kind of sees an opportunity here. So, of course, he's in politics, so that mind, we all know how political minds work. He knows that in his back pocket, he's got this really gorgeous, really beautiful, very self-assured, socially adept cousin, right? And she could come in handy a little bit later down the road. And in fact, she actually does. She actually is crucial in helping him become the first prime minister of Italy. She helps this man out quite a bit. So, at his invitation, right, Camilla saw Virginia as and her unsurpassed beauty as a way to gain the attention and possibly the support of the French Emperor Napoleon III. Now, at her cousin's request, Virginia and her husband both traveled to Paris on Christmas Day, mind you, of 1855. Now, at this point, the fact that Virginia is with her husband is kind of a sour spot because, of course, her cousin wanted her to come alone. Because why would he ask her to come unless, she needs to use her beauty in some way? Now, bringing her husband along is going to do nothing but put quite a bit of a damper on that whole situation, especially because her husband is actually quite possessive of her. He is very possessive of this unique and unparalleled beauty that is his wife. And of course, doesn't see her as a person. He sees her as a possession. And as a possession, he owns her, right? So of course, she's not allowed to go out and do her own thing. And she certainly is not allowed to go out and cavort and socialize with other men. But of course, this is what her cousin Camillo has in mind. Like, he needs her to come cavort. He needs her to come socialize, and he needs her to help the cause, right? So they get to Paris, and Virginia is very quickly kind of like given the lowdown. She's told exactly what needs to be helped with, and she's down for a challenge. She is down. She's like, okay. And she sees also a way to not only get away from her husband, because of course she doesn't want to be married to this man. She thinks he's old and he's gross, and she wants to live life. She doesn't want to be shut away in a chateau somewhere, missing out on everything that's going on. She doesn't want to miss out on the revolution and the culture, and she wants to be at court, and she wants to party and play and things like that. So she sees this as her kind of escape from her husband. So both her and her cousin are kind of working together towards a common goal. Now, of course, once she gets to Paris, her cousin tells her that he needs her to seduce the emperor. She needs to get the ear of the emperor. She needs to sway Napoleon to their side and to their cause by any means necessary. And that's exactly what the cousin says. By any means necessary, she needs to convince him that to help them is to help himself, and basically it's going to be a beneficial situation for all of them. Now, it takes Virginia 4 long months in order to make this happen. Now, usually, the emperor was a very easily seduced man. He was very much driven by his passions, and as beautiful as Virginia was, for some reason, he was just kind of holding out. Come to find out, Napoleon, of course, was married, because they all have wives, right? Mistresses. Just because you have a mistress doesn't mean that you don't have a wife. But his wife absolutely detested Virginia, could not stand her, and because of this, Napoleon tried very hard to keep his distance from Virginia. He wanted to kind of he wanted to keep his wife happy, at least in a small way. doesn't last forever though. So Virginia and on Christmas Day they get to Paris and they start the Operation Mistress. Within a few months, like I said, it took 4 months, but it did eventually happen. Virginia had become the emperor's mistress. Now, while such relationships are usually kind of kept very hush-hush and, people don't really talk about it, like, even though people know that you're his mistress, like, even though people knew that she was Napoleon's mistress, it wasn't something that decent people flaunted. It wasn't something that decent people spoke about or really even acknowledged. So she was basically just supposed to be seen and not heard. But of course, for Virginia, that was completely and totally unacceptable. There was no way in the world that she was going to be in Paris, of all places, right in the center of court. And she wasn't going to be some meek little mouse and just kind of like be seen and not heard. She wanted to make a splash. So of course, that's exactly what she did. She would show up to balls and very boldly and very brazenly be on Napoleon's arm, and I think her one biggest claim to fame is the way that she would dress. Like, this woman knew how to freaking make an entrance. She knew how to make everyone stop and stare, and it became one of her specialties. On one instance in particular, she was at a masquerade ball, I believe, and it was she kind of showed up on Napoleon's arm, and she was in like a very, very risque costume. She actually showed up as the Queen of Hearts. Now, you gotta put this all into perspective, right? So Napoleon is at this ball, but if Napoleon is in attendance, that means his wife is in attendance as well. So the fact that Virginia decides to show up as his mistress, dressed as the Queen of Hearts, kind of proclaiming to whoever is present that, kind of like she won. I've got him wrapped around my finger. I've got him exactly where I want him. It immediately PO'd Napoleon's wife off to a point where she could no longer ignore Virginia. So she actually walks up to Virginia and says the heart might be quite low. And that whole thing means is Virginia was basically naked at this point. So she walks into the ballroom and she's in this getup of, she's dressed as the Queen of Hearts. And she's supposed to have like underwear, like lingerie on underneath this ball gown. But this ball gown is almost completely sheer. And it, of course, is dotted with teeny tiny little hearts everywhere. But the hearts are placed very, very strategically. And actually, you can pretty much tell that this woman is naked under that very, very thin layer of teeny tiny hearts and mesh. And it drove people insane. This costume was very, very polarizing. Some people thought it was completely outrageous and just absolutely awful and disgusting. And then some people thought it was completely and totally sensational. Now, the emperor's wife was definitely not approving of this costume, and ultimately this is what led to her breaking up with Napoleon. Now, she kind of she was Napoleon's mistress for, I want to say, around 2 years, and during that 2 years she definitely had his ear. She had his trust. She definitely did what she set out to do. In the end, she helped her cousin's cause, things like that. And pillow talk is a very, very strong thing. So after a man, you're laying down in bed and you're just kind of like chit-chatting, everything is right with your world. She kind of did exactly what she was supposed to do. After 2 years, though, the jig was kind of up, and basically she was getting tired of it all anyway. So she just kind of she decided to move on. Now, during this time that she has been cavorting with Napoleon, we can't forget about the fact that she is indeed a married woman. Not only does Napoleon have a wife, but she has a husband, and her husband has absolutely lost his ever-loving mind. He cannot believe what his wife has been up to. So at some point during this 2-year affair, he gets very tired of it being rubbed in his face that his wife is sleeping with the emperor, and he decides that he's going to get a divorce. He's done. They're separating. He doesn't want anything to do with her anymore, and he actually packs his bags and he leaves. Now, during this time, before he leaves, Virginia, has bled this man dry. Now, again, he was a member of the nobility, right? So he's got deep pockets and connections. So on top of the connections from her own birth and the connections from her husband, she's also got the connections from Napoleon, from the man whose mistress she is. So she is very, very well connected, and as such needs to present herself that way. Now, all of this time, she's getting gifts and things from Napoleon, but she's not necessarily making a ton of money. So because she needs to portray a certain, she's got to put forth a certain appearance, right? She's got to spend money. She's got to have clothes made. And to do that, she dipped into her husband's bank account. Now, during the 2 years that she was Napoleon's mistress, she absolutely bankrupted her husband. She sent him back to Italy broke as a joke, pretty much bankrupted him. And all of that money was spent on clothes. She bought capes and hats and bags and gloves and shoes, and every single day it was something new. And it was because every costume, right? Because it's not even her just dressing, it's a character she's playing. Every costume had to be more elaborate than the last, and she spent millions. She spent millions of dollars on her wardrobe. So by the time her husband says, "I'm done, I'm over it, like I'm not doing this anymore," he goes home only to find out that he's ruined. Basically, she has ruined him, and she just absolutely does not care at this point, because she's got everything that she wants to. She has made sure to network during her period of being Napoleon's mistress, so she has invites just kind of like rolling in the door, because not only is she beautiful and charismatic, but she's also a curiosity at this point. Like, what did the emperor see in her? We know she's beautiful, but what else hides behind the facade? So she's got invitations rolling in from literally everywhere. And of course, if somebody is inviting her, they're going to take care of her, they're going to feed her, they're going to provide her travel. Her life is made. She doesn't have to worry about anything. Now, during this time when her husband decides he's done and decides to go back to Italy, he says, "I'm taking my son. I am taking my son with me. I am not going to have him be around such an unscrupulous, immoral woman." And she loses her ever-loving freaking mind. Now, after her separation from her husband, he, of course, tried to take his son back to Italy with him, but she was not having it. Like I said, she was a very doting mother. She adored her son. As only a rich mother could, she spoiled him absolutely rotten. And because of that, he adored her in return. And of course, he didn't want to return to Italy with his father either. So she basically was like, "It's not happening. It's just not gonna happen." So her husband ends up eventually having to tuck his tail and retreat, because she sends the dogs after him. So he just retreats back to Italy and is he just washes his hands of her, and he's done. Now, during this point, she is still Napoleon's mistress, and life is good at this point in time. However, she ends up getting a little bit big for her britches, and this comes back to bite her in the hiney pretty hard. Now, it lasted around 2 years, her affair with Napoleon, but it actually broke up because she was so blasé about the whole thing. She was so disrespectful towards Napoleon's wife. It was nothing but a competition. She was so she just was so full of herself that she thought basically there were no consequences to any of her actions. And it got to a certain point where Josephine, which I believe was Napoleon's wife, was like, "You need to choose. You need to pick her or me, because I'm not going to take the disrespect anymore." And of course, he picked his wife, and he sends Virginia freaking packing. So she kind of has to tuck tail and run as well. She retreats back to Italy, and she stays there, and she just kind of regroups a little bit. And of course, nobody forgot about her. She had made such a splash while she was in Paris that the invitations continued, but she had to spend a certain amount of time away from Paris. She basically had to stay away from Napoleon and his wife, because they just were not having it at that point in time. So she goes back to Italy. Now, 4 years after she separates from Napoleon. You know, the whole point of her getting with him in the first place had been to accomplish a goal. Now, 4 years after she splits up with him, that goal actually ends up being accomplished. The Kingdom of Italy was eventually established, and of course, Virginia maintained that she was an essential part of that. And I believe that she probably was, to a certain degree. I'm sure she, persuaded him and gave him some pretty good bulletin points throughout their relationship. So obviously she helped. Maybe it wasn't all her doing, but she had a little something to do with it. So after the Kingdom of Italy is established, her cousin actually ends up getting promoted. He becomes the first prime minister of Italy, and because of this, he is very, very grateful to his cousin, and actually ends up setting her up with a little bit of an allowance. It's kind of like a stipend, and actually it's from the government, and it's actually kind of like a spy paycheck. He actually was so impressed with how she was able to handle the situation, even though eventually she had to retreat, and she wasn't his mistress, the emperor's mistress, for an extremely long time. The end goal was accomplished either way. So her cousin actually ends up setting up a little bit of a stipend for her, and it's a good stipend. It's a good stipend, and she's living like a queen at this point in time. So now, whereas she was kind of dependent on generosity of family, things like that, at this point, now she's got her own money. Now she's got her own money, and she can do exactly what in the world she wants to do whenever she wants to do it. So she very, very quickly packs her bags, and she heads right back to France. So she moved back to France by 1861. She had moved back to France, where she settled in Passy before returning to Paris. Now, all eyes were on her. Her reputation had definitely preceded her. Everybody remembered that she was Napoleon's mistress. Everyone remembered she just was a completely and totally outrageous kind of person. And as much as people might have been repulsed and appalled by her, they were also intrigued. So of course she had invitations flooding through the door, and of course she accepted. She's got plenty of money to do whatever she wants to now. She's got plenty of money for capes and clothes and costumes galore, and she goes about town. She attends balls and soirees, and she's basically the talk of the town. Every time she enters a room, she's like the center of attention, and she is genuinely eating it up. She is living for every single moment of it. She's just basically having the time of her life at this point in time. Now, she was described as having long, wavy blonde hair, a complexion that was delicate and flawless. She said she had a delicate oval face and eyes that constantly changed color from green to an extraordinary blue-violet. And in all of the recounts of her appearance that I kind of went over, her eyes were always mentioned. Her eyes were truly something spectacular and something to behold. She just had those one of a kind eyes. Remember Elizabeth Taylor? She had those violet eyes. Very much the same story with Miss Victoria. So she is out, she's exploring, she is the talk of the town. The French court was completely and totally obsessed with her. She quickly became the it girl, and people called her beauty a miracle. Like, again, people are just kind of like, people are blowing smoke up her hiney left and right, and she is eating it up like she's at an all-you-can-eat hot dog contest. Like, she is just, she cannot get enough of it. And of course, all of these compliments, all of this praise is going to have an effect on her psyche, right? And she very, very quickly becomes even more big-headed than she was before. And this really, really becomes a problem. I think at some point, especially after, I think she was lonely. I think she was lonely because she had a lot of affairs, and she slept with a bunch of different men. She basically did whatever she wanted to. She was pretty much an emancipated courtesan, which basically means that she didn't sleep with men for money. She didn't need to be a kept woman. She could keep herself, but she slept with him because that's what she was good at. That's what she enjoyed doing. And I think a lot of that had a little bit of a negative effect on her mentally as well, because she just ended up, she just didn't seem like a very happy person. It seemed like she really needed that validation. She needed that constant praise, or everything was wrong and her sky started to fall. Now, it ended up that she just took it too far, and instead of it being a facet of her personality, it ended up becoming her entire personality. And, you know, all is fair in love and war and all that good stuff, and beauty really is an awe-inspiring and wonderful thing to behold. But there comes a certain point when you can only look at something so long, right? You can only admire something so long before it could be the most beautiful piece of art in the entire world, in the entire universe. But eventually you're going to get bored. You're going to get tired of looking at it. And you're going to try to find something, some other quality that is going to maybe, there's got to be something else that kind of keeps you around. And unfortunately for Virginia, there was no other quality. She had never had to develop. And of course she was witty, and she, but she couldn't hold a conversation. She couldn't talk about anything but herself. She had no interest in anyone else, in anyone else's life, anything like that. She literally just wanted to sit there and be admired. And it started to take a toll on her social, what is the word I'm looking for? On her reputation. People just thought she was incredibly dull. There is a quote. It says, "After a few moments and the pleasure of looking at her had faded, she began to get on your nerves quite a bit." Like, she was just really, really annoying. She was so self-absorbed, and all she wanted to do was sit there and hear you talk about how great she was. And nobody wants to do that. Nobody wants to play into that 100% of the time. And she quickly found herself going from it girl to, falling out of favor really, really quickly. And after that, she wouldn't speak to women, right? She thought herself so far above any other woman that she would not deign to speak to another female. She kept herself surrounded by men and surrounded by admirers, because another woman would be competition, right? And she just couldn't have that. But because of this, it prevented her from building any kind of friendship. I don't think in all of the research I did, I found any instance, not one single instance, of her having any kind of friendship, of her having any kind of real connection to another human being. And at this point in time, this is when she finds photography, and photography turns out to be her outlet. This is where she puts all of her passion. This is where she puts all of her drive. She embarks on a mission to capture each and every special moment in her life, from the time that she can remember until the future. She actually endeavors, it's kind of insane. She invents the selfie. She meets up with this photographer, and they form this partnership. And over the course of their relationship, they weren't together, but their professional relationship together, they took over 700 photos. Now, you've got to remember, photos back in that time were incredibly expensive. They were incredibly expensive just for one shot. On top of that, all of the setup and things like that it took, not only to take the picture, but to process it, all of that good stuff. 700 photos is a mind-boggling feat. She literally, she created the selfie. She had 700 pictures of herself in all kinds of different regalia. So different moments in her life that were poignant and important to her. Also, people from myths and mythology, people from people from legend. Like she if she could dress up in a costume and take a picture, baby, she did it. She took herself to the cleaners taking all of these pictures, because again, like I said, they were incredibly expensive. But I think she put all of her frustration, all of her sadness, all of her loneliness into these photographs. And again, also, she's not an unintelligent woman, right? She knows that beauty doesn't last forever. And also, time is going by. She is getting older. Birthdays come and they go. And she's realizing that the reflection she's seeing in the mirror isn't exactly the same as it was the year prior. So she's definitely starting to notice that she is aging at this point, and she's panicking. And I think also the photos were a bid to stave off the hands of time, to capture the only important thing, the only thing that she thought was important about herself or notable or special at all, right? She's scared to death that she's aging and she's losing her prized possession, which was her beauty. Now, after she fell out of favor with the French court, she decided to travel. She took a tour of Europe. Now, throughout the year she's been in France, she has received numerous invitations to come visit from multiple different countries or kingdoms across Europe. So she decides to go. She begins a very nomadic period of her life, and this period of her life is again full of adventure and wonder, and she kind of steps into the spy position once again. So she is touring across Europe, she's visiting different kingdoms, and basically people are just inviting her just to see if she's actually as awful as the rumors that they've heard. And the minute that they confirm that yes, indeed, she genuinely is just as awful as everybody says she is, her welcome is kind of worn out, and it's on to the next. Now, throughout her travels, she visits the Kingdom of Prussia, and during her time there meets a man by the name of Bismarck, and she starts an affair with him. This actually ends up being a fairly important relationship in her life, actually. They began the affair, and years later, her charms would once again be called upon in 1871. Napoleon III, who was at that point sick, defeated, he had lost his kingdom, he is no longer the emperor, right? And he calls upon her and asks her to intervene with Bismarck. At this point, Bismarck has got quite a bit of power. He is a very, very powerful man, and of course, he's got a soft spot for our Countess. So Napoleon, who, his ex-mistress, he calls his ex-mistress and begs her to put in a good word with Bismarck, asks her to please, defeated and with his empire in ruins, asked her to intervene with Bismarck to cancel his plan for the Prussian army to occupy Paris. Now, Paris is still Napoleon's last stronghold. It's his last defense. It's his last hope. And Bismarck, who is a very powerful man at this point, is set to actually just take it over. So he calls the Countess and he begs her, please, 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 save me, basically. And I think the only reason she does it is just so that she could. Just so that she could say that she did that. And of course, she succeeds. When it comes to men, she is incredibly persuasive. And she actually gets Bismarck to spare Paris. And by extension, Napoleon. Now, after this, Victoria began to notice herself, she's sad. She's sad and she's lonely. She has spent basically her entire life kind of traveling around, and at this point her son is grown, and she's trying to find any a reason, right? Her beauty is fading. She wakes up one morning, and of course time has passed, and she wakes up one morning and she looks in the mirror and she realizes that she doesn't recognize the reflection in the mirror anymore. It is completely, it's bothersome to her. She goes into full on panic mode, and she very quickly is just capture the beauty, save the beauty, you do what you need to do in order to preserve the beauty. So she jumps into another bunch of photos. She spends pretty much her last dimes to have these pictures made. And she kind of it's just she doesn't know what else to do with herself. And I feel like this is the real story. This is the real lesson of the story today, because she put so much importance on her beauty and so much importance on the way that she looked and the way that she was perceived by others. She put so much importance on it that she never took the time to figure out what actually made her happy. She never took the time to develop herself as a person. And when her beauty left, because beauty is only skin deep, and unfortunately it is very, very fleeting. So when her beauty fled and she was left looking in the mirror and seeing an old woman, she didn't know what to do with herself. And because of that, she shut down. She became a recluse, and she basically didn't have anything to live for anymore. She couldn't stand to be out in public. She couldn't stand to be around people anymore. She shut herself in her home. She bought a home, and she painted all of the walls black, and she got rid of every mirror, every reflective surface in the entire home. And like if she couldn't get rid of it or break it, she covered it with a sheet. She painted all the walls black, and she just kind of like lived her twilight years, like the last part of her life, in this black hole, basically, reliving through her photographs old memories and things like that, but never truly experiencing a life outside of, very surface level. Just kind of like, it's just so sad. I feel so freaking bad for her. Like it's almost like she was kind of swept up in this, in this like whirlwind of romance, and I guess it's romance in a way, but she put so much stock, and other people as well. It wasn't just her. Everybody put so much stock into her appearance and how beautiful she was that nobody ever took the time to tell her that she was worth more than, she was more than just a pretty face. And eventually, when the pretty face was gone and the wrinkles set in and things kind of sagged and she wasn't in the flush of youth anymore, she just didn't know what to do with herself. She locked herself in her home, painted all the walls black, lived in this dark hole, this pit of misery. She never left the house. She became a recluse. She never left the house unless it was under the cover of nightfall. Like, she wouldn't let herself be seen in daylight. I can only imagine how truly miserable her existence must have been. She, in the end, lived a very sad, very lonely life, locked away in a pit of despair, bemoaning the loss of her one valuable possession. It is absolutely heartbreaking. Now, Virginia actually ended up passing away at the age of 62. She passed on November 28th, 1899. And during when she passed, she was actually working on taking more photographs and compiling some of the very best photographs from throughout her life in order to do a museum exhibit entitled The Most Beautiful Woman of the Century. So even to the very last day of her life, she was still completely and totally consumed by reliving and recapturing the youth and beauty and the importance that she once possessed. And I think the moral of today's story is, don't let your beauty be the most important thing about you. My grandmother, I watched her go through something very, very similar to this. My grandmother was an absolutely beautiful woman in her youth and put a lot of stock into appearances. And also she forced that same ideal both onto my mother and onto us when we were younger, on her grandchildren. And I remember her being so bitter about the fact that she wasn't getting male attention anymore, that she wasn't the most beautiful woman in the room anymore. And I remember her being so unhappy and so miserable. I vowed that I was never gonna let being beautiful be the most important thing about me, ever. I wasn't gonna let any one trait be the most important thing about me at all. I mean, it kind of happened anyway, because being a mom is kind of like up there for me. But like, I just never wanted something physical to be that important, because physicality fades, physicality changes, right? You can be super skinny one year and be, you know, a hubba bubba the next. Like, it just, things changes, looks change so frequently. And I never ever, especially my mamas, I never want any of you to look in the mirror and wish that you saw something different. The Lord made you exactly the way he made you for a reason. You are perfect in every single way because that is how the Lord made you. He made you perfectly. He made you perfectly imperfect. Guys, I love you so very much. I really hope that you enjoyed today's video. It's kind of close to my heart. I've struggled with body issues and, you know, image issues my entire life. And I want to say, when I got into my 30s, that is when I really like understood that looks are looks, and, you know, being pretty is great, but there is so much more to life than just being pretty. You are special, you are important, you are wonderful, you are kind, you are smart. There are so many other beautiful things about you other than beauty. Guys, I love you so very much. As always, no filters, no fancy lighting. It is just me sitting in front of my camera telling you guys an epic love story. Hoping you guys are enjoying what I'm doing. This is the finished look. Do we like it? Do we love it? Let me know in the comments below. I will, of course, be posting finished pictures over on Instagram and Facebook. Click the links below to go check those posts out. Guys, until next time, stay safe, take care of yourselves, and remember, you're important. Bye.